Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of genre fusion, trying to find bands that merge two hopefully wildly different genres together and seeing what they make out of it. Today we're going to be looking at black metal meets jazz with White Ward, Stillborn Knowledge. Let's see what's going on with these guys today. Got some really fun cymbal work. That's a good sign of some black metal that might work for me. It's interesting, it has a very muddy low end, but a clearer high ends. What? That's straight up metalcore right there. You know, I was a little concerned with this being on this week, but I'm intrigued now. Oh, playing around with some dissonance. Interesting choices there. Okay, finally. Yeah, we have some jazz drumming. We have some prominent bass going on. We're swinging the cymbals. It's interesting how well something bluesy works with that dreary heaviness behind it. Yeah, so this was interesting. I don't think it as seamlessly interwove black metal and jazz as yesterday's uh whatever. What did we check out? Black MIDI, where that was post punk and math rock, and we felt the structural experimentation of the post punk being paired with the rhythmic experimentation of math rock, and both of them happening simultaneously. I can't really hear too many moments in this track where I feel the black metal and the jazz overlapped. And I think that's just primarily due to the fact that they can't. Black metal is intense. There is some upbeat jazz, but for the most part, you're not really going to get intense jazz. Even something like swing, which is going to be a bit more, you can get some higher tempo swing, especially once you start looking at like background swing for dance. Um, then I mean, like you're gonna get some up tempo stuff, but it's not really gonna be anything that drives intensity. And I think that was one thing here is that there isn't really many areas where the two genres can overlap. You're going to have to give up an aspect of one to achieve the other. And I think we see that here where we tend to either be doing black metal with a saxophone, or we're playing jazz and have a distorted guitar behind it. There isn't really any moment where I would say that we are combining jazz ideas, not just the sound of jazz, but jazz ideas with black metal ones. I mean, even just the basses. Not all jazz has swinging eighths, but the one time we did introduce a jazzy part of the song, we had swung eighths in it, and black metal is about rigidity. We have straight eighths in black metal. In fact, we have straight sixteenths in black metal because a lot of it's tremolo picking and that double bass kick and just the raw intensity of the speed of the attacks. Um, they don't go together. They're opposite sides of the rhythmic spectrum, of the atmospheric spectrum. Um, so yeah, I don't see that we actually combined these two simultaneously, but we did combine them in other ways. Like I mentioned, we took the sounds of one and paired it with the composition of another, and we allowed that to happen both ways. We did have black metal with a saxophone and something jazzier with a distorted guitar behind it. It fits the genre. I mean, it fits the week's theme, I suppose. Not as strongly as I would like, but honestly, given that I knew it was black metal meets jazz, I was really skeptical on what they were actually going to do with it. And I think this is honestly the best case scenario for this without getting into areas of just noise. Um, and I think it works well. I enjoyed some of this. It goes through a variety of ideas, though. It isn't just black metal and jazz. There's also metalcore. Why is there metalcore? And I started reading this while the song was fading out. I checked out some of this stuff in the description here. And it says furious and intimate, exciting and intriguing. Futility Report, which is the name of their album, stems from a thoroughly modern vision, an innovative interpretation of extreme music which breaks down established codes while simultaneously deep rooted in the obscure history of black metal. And while I think it's a bit, well, let's just say it's not a very humble description of themselves, I think it's fairly accurate, though, right? I don't know, at least, I've only heard one song from the album, so it's very possible I got the tamest one here. But this doesn't exactly break down established codes. It does, however, combine a bunch of different ideas. It does sort of reinterpret extreme metal through the lens of other, less extreme, but still odd musical ideas. Um, because it was interesting when the metalcore section comes in, which is a bit more melodic than they had showcased in their black metal intro, minus the saxophone they played over it. Um, and the drum beat was a bit more punkier. It still felt like black metal to me. Just, played with a little slower, with a different rhythmic cadence. Something a little bit more groovy rather than rigid. Syncopated rather than rigid. I want to say that. You can have rigid groove. So I don't want to say that. Yeah, syncopated versus rigidity. But it still kind of had a lot of the elements. It was still a bit faster played. We still had a lot of notes being played at the same time, especially in the second metalcore section when we did the guitar solo and duet. The drums are still intense. There's still a weightiness to it. The distorted guitars, I don't think, changed timbre or tone. We didn't change up the way the guitar sounded to move between these two ideas. So, there's a lot of things that worked that were carried over between them that I think showcases that there's really not that big of a difference between them, at least not in the way this is handled. This is a lot higher fi black metal, and I think that pairs well with metalcore, which tends to be produced a bit higher fi. If we were to move between a lo-fi black metal and a similar concept of metalcore, there would be differences. We would either have to make a lo-fi metalcore to pair with it, which would feel odd, especially for longtime metalcore fans like myself. And of course, every time I say this, I always forget that there's two eras of metalcore. I'm mostly leaning towards the modern melodic side, not the metalcore that started in the 90s, 2000s, the early stuff. I'm mostly talking about what is considered metalcore from like 2005 onward, 2000 and onward, something like that, where it's more of a melodic focus on the music. Um, but yeah, we would have to do a lo-fi style of metalcore, which would be odd given its strong relationship to clear production, or we would have to have a production shift midway through, which would draw a very clear line between the two. So, yeah, the production definitely helps in kind of lining them up, but it is really interesting just to hear how they're not that different apart. It is mostly a shift in rhythmic structure and playing at twice as fast or half as fast speed. Um, so what I want to focus on next, though, is something I didn't know that should work, but honestly, I should have known. Saxophone and metal. It works all the time. We've heard it in more popular sounding stuff like Shrezzers. I think that's metalcore actually. We've heard it in Doom with Rivers of Nile. We've heard it in post rock, post metal. Haven't done this on the channel, but I checked out the Ocean's latest album on my own, and Colin Stetson is featured on one of the tracks. I think it's the second to last one. Um, it works in post metal. I at least haven't heard a song that features saxophone in a metal context that doesn't work. But the idea of saxophone in black metal just sounded weird to me. I don't know why. Like I said, all evidence states this should have been fine. And of course, after having listened to it, it was fine. It was phenomenal, in fact. But it was strange coming into thinking of it because, uh, you know, I don't know about other people. When I think of jazz, I think of two instruments: trumpet, because I'm a trumpet player and I've been a trumpet player in jazz, and I look up to a lot of jazz trumpet players. But second is tenor sax. I don't know what it is about the tenor sax. It is just very jazz to me. Even when I think about it in classical music, it's still always, when I think about it, my first thing is, nope, that's a jazz instrument. I don't know why. I associate jazz, or I associate the tenor sax to jazz first. Then I remember, oh yeah, it's used in a lot of other contexts. So, thinking of jazz and black metal, the first thing I think of is they're going to add a saxophone in here. The other thing I was thinking of was swung eights, and I was thinking of also just less intensity. Of course, we've talked about that before. We'll get into it again for first time viewers here, especially in the drumming, right? Very different drumming technique. Just the entire vibe, though, is less intense. And so the first thing I got was a saxophone, and it worked. I was worried about it, but it works. And I honestly want more of it. I don't know that I necessarily want more of the black metal underneath it. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not a huge fan of all the intensity, right? That's what black metal does. Tremolo picking, double bass kicks, 16th notes everywhere, no holds barred, just play as fast as you can and get all those attacks out there. And I think it was an interesting texture to put under the saxophone. And I think it kind of worked, but again, I'm not a too big fan of the texture of the attacks. I think just having that vibe underneath, which is something we'll talk about later because they did bring this idea back into that jazz section near the end, is something I could really do more with because it works. A lot of metal is based on rock, is based on rock and roll, which is based on blues. Now, there is a bit of a difference between the blues that jazz used and a majority of the commonly utilized bluesish style chords that rock and eventually metal picked up on and then mutated into what would work best for the instrument, which, through the early years of metal, we had a lot of power chords. So kind of a little bit away from the bluesiness, but it retained that vibe, right? Metal is not traditionally happy music. We don't really play around a lot with major chords in metal, and neither does blues. It makes sense that if you were to write a blues related, blues adjacent melody line, it would fit in a lot of metal that still retains some of those bluesy elements in the chord progression. And then we have a synergizing of emotion. It doesn't matter that we're using distorted guitars. It doesn't matter that we have a saxophone. It doesn't matter that the guitars are playing a million beats per second and the saxophone is holding out these notes. What matters is that they're all in that same emotional vibe. And blues and metal work very well together, which, I just kind of dictated or showed why, the lineage there. But it really does, both at the beginning when we have more of a bluesy jazz line or a bluesy sax line over top the black metal portion, and later on when we have sort of a bluesy rhythm section with this just heavy guitar behind it. It doesn't really clash as much as I thought it was going to. And I think I really dig that vibe. I don't know if it's something that I'm always going to dig. I don't know if black metal with saxophone as a whole works for me, but what they accomplished right here, how they specifically went about doing that, it did work. I'm really impressed by that. Um, So we've talked about the black metal section. We talked about the metalcore section, which the metalcore section is interesting because it provides a middle point. This analysis is all over the place. I apologize. I'm just kind of getting to things as I get to them, stream of consciousness style. I don't really have much of a direction here. Not like I usually do. The metalcore section, though, provides an interesting middle point where the black metal is mostly textural. We have all the attacks coming from the guitars, from the drums. We have the textural sound coming from the vocal yells. There's not a lot of pitch going on here. The guitars do provide some dyad work, but a lot of it is sort of chordal, right? We stay on the same note for a bar at a time, and if we remove all of the attacks, all of the 16th notes, and basically convert any non-changing pitch, and we combine them, we're going to see a slew of whole notes and half notes. Basically just a lot of holding out of a tone. It provides more of a sound floor than a melody. And the most moving aspect would be the vocals, but they don't have a pitch. They're more of a texture or a rhythm. So we have a mostly rhythmic textural section. Then when we get to the jazz part by the end of the track, we have a very atmospheric melodic based one where the saxophone takes us on a journey, and the drums behind them and the bass behind them provide sort of a groove and an atmosphere for that to exist within, which is in stark contrast to the atmosphere that the black metal section made, which was harsh and aggressive and weighty and overbearing. The jazz one's very laid back. The metalcore sits in the middle, where we have the weight of the black metal section, but the strong melodic component of the jazz section. It is the mediator between these two styles. It is, I don't know if that was intentionally done. And probably not. I'm probably reading into a lot of that a little bit, because we do have the saxophone brought in that first black metal section. So it's not like we are transitioning through this, where we have textural metal, melodic metal, and then melodic jazz, where we can kind of see this transformation from one idea to the next. But I do think it's interesting that the primarily textural side and the primarily melodic side is bridged with one that is textural and melodic simultaneously. Then we get to the jazz, though, and I really, really love this moment, because it happened a bit later in the song than I was expecting. I was a little worried, like I said, coming into this, because a saxophone does not make it a jazz song. So we actually have a jazz section. And the first thing I noticed, swung eighths on the hi-hat, maybe the ride cymbal. Not super present like a crash, but probably maybe an open hi-hat, maybe a ride cymbal. Just enough to give some presence, though. And swung eighths, for those who don't know, is when you apply more weight to one of the pair of eighth notes than the other. So in straight eighths, every eighth note has the same rhythmic weight to it. So if your tempo is bop bop, or sorry, bop 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 bop, your eighth notes are going to be bop 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 bop. An eighth note just means that you hit it on every half of a beat. So in swing, though, they're not rigid. There's more weight given to one over the other, so you get bop ba up ba up ba up ba up ba up ba up, and it's not a static idea where everything is symmetrical. It's asymmetrical. It provides a little bit of rush into the downbeat, and we hear that on the cymbals. It's one of the first things I noticed when we came into this section. The other thing I noticed was the snare. Very sparse, maybe once a bar, once every other bar, and it'll hit on a downbeat. Not super strong. It is not like a rock snare or a metal snare hit where you just hit it with all your might and get this nice loud crack. More of a gentle hit, and occasionally, not always, a little bit of some improvised syncopation after it. And if you go back and listen to that section, you'll notice that despite everything else being very pattern-based or lick-based or riff-based, ostinato, whatever you want to call it, just a single idea that gets repeated over and over and over. The snares don't. Like I said, they're kind of semi-improv. Sometimes you'll get just the snare on the downbeat. Sometimes you'll get the snare on the downbeat and then the offbeat of the next beat. Sometimes you'll get a couple in a row. Sometimes, I think there was one time where we actually got a little bit of like a ghost note roll after that initial strike. But on top of this like improvisational aspect and the sparseness of the snare, which again is in stark contrast to the hit the snare on every downbeat because you're just spamming as much sound as you can in the black metal section, there's also just the chill laid backness of it. And this is something I've talked about before when we've looked at live performances and I've talked about stuff like this. Rock drumming is really all about hitting your drum kit as hard as you can. There's not really a lot of dynamic work in it, other than we're in the quiet section now, then we're in the loud section. But in jazz, drumming is a very dynamic play style. It's all about various inflection and also restraint. Something I talk about a lot is when you're watching a rock or metal drummer, it's huge arm swings. When they go to hit the snare or the cymbals, it's wide movements. And when you watch a jazz drummer, it's really all about the wrist, especially the cymbal work. There might be a little bit more arm movement on a snare or a tom hit, but it's also nowhere near as wide or as forceful or as fast as a rock or a metal performance. It really is about the nuance of the drumming, not the sound or the heaviness or the weight of it. It is not supposed to be a war drum, it's a calming rhythmic component of the track. And we hear that here. When the drummer gets into that groove and he hits the snare, it is not a crack. It's not ghost notes, but you're not getting that loud crack of like a flam. It's more of a gentle strike. It's forceful. It has intent. It's not a ghost note, but it's not a loud crack like we get during the blast beat sections. This is not done with all the force that he can muster. Um, and I absolutely love. And then we look at the bass too, right? In the black metal sections, the bass is primarily what sounds to me probably hiding underneath the guitars, probably playing something very similar to what they're doing, maybe not as 16th notes, but as eighth notes, just because the lower tones can get muddied, which they already are. I forgot to talk about that. Um, yeah, the black metal section is just muddy. The low end, one of the first things I think I talked about in the reaction, the low end is just very unclear, very fuzzy down there. The high end, though, the higher you get, the clearer it gets. It's a interesting way to go about um, producing a track. But anyways, the bass is very clear in the jazz section, and it's prominent. There's nothing else that really overshadows it. It is laying down a bit of some chordal stuff while also playing in a light lead melody element, but also giving space to the saxophone to take lead. But what I absolutely loved about this section, what set it apart from pretty much any other jazz out there, is just this low rumble of a distorted guitar in the back of all of it. And it's like this looming danger that adds an edge that jazz just does not typically have. And it was something. I enjoyed it. It's one of those things that I don't know how to talk about it. It's brand new to me, but it really made me feel things that were cool. I guess is a way to go about that. It's just it's a new feeling that I enjoyed, a new sound that I think just worked well. Definitely something I'm going to be listening more for, trying to find more of, I suppose. Um, and even like we see one more inversion here, close to the end, which is the harsh vocals over like an acoustic guitar or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was a quiet, pensive section, and this dude's just screaming his lungs out. And it's kind of funny when you describe it like that. You know, in retrospective, it's kind of uh, just way overdone. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but it's just it's unusual, right? It's this quiet moment. Usually, this is time when somebody who doesn't do clean singing might, I don't know, whisper. And if they do have a clean singing voice, they might shift to that and then allow it to grow into the big moment and shift back to their harshes or something like that. And he's like, nope, I'm just going to keep screaming. I'm not going to change my volume. I'm not going to change my intensity. The song's at a 3, but I'm still at a 10. You guys can deal with it. And it's just a little comical there. It's absurd, I think, is the word I want. It's a little absurd. And then it grew into what I thought was going to be a final black metal section, and instead we got a final metalcore section that consisted of guitar solos that were very interesting. A lot of interesting choices. We're going to stick with that word. Interesting choices that created the melodies for the solos. I can't say I always agreed with them. I can't say I was along for the journey on them. Sometimes it felt like I'd been kicked out of the car and I was just like, what happened? I was in this ride with you up until that point and you ditched me. But I think that's kind of the point of it, is that it's a very thought-provoking track as far as combining elements. Sometimes I don't know that they always work for a first time listen. Maybe I'll listen to it again and just absolutely love that guitar section. But it they dove into some dissonance. They had some odd phrasings rhythmically. There was one part where it felt like they distinctly went out of key for a single bar. It wasn't an accidental. It's like the guitar changed the key for a moment before coming back into what the underlying instruments were doing. I guess that's to say it was a very experimental guitar solo in sections. Other parts, like I said, with the way it started, it felt very much like a pretty generic metalcore solo, a rock solo even. Um, and yeah, it was like 8 bars in, and then started to experiment, started push and push and push, and started doing some stranger stuff, and then started to reel it back in. I think they ended relatively normal, so to speak. But again, it's just one of those things that I didn't know what to expect going into it. And they started me out with 8 bars of pretty standard fare stuff and put me in the wrong mindset because they really started to push the boundaries there. And for good reason. I will always, always support people who push boundaries, whether it's a single moment of a song or an entire 20-minute experimental thing, work of art. But it really helps to be in the right mindset for it too, especially since not many sections of this song were experimental in that way. Experimental in merging genre, but typically within each genre, we were still working within genre conventions. The jazz section, as I described, was very jazzy. The black metal was very black metal. The metalcore was very metalcore. I did not expect to have my my understanding of music get obliterated 6 minutes into this track without any warning going into it. So definitely something that I think might work a little better on a subsequent listen, but really caught me off guard here, and I had a difficult time reconciling how that solo fit into the larger idea of the song here. As for themes, honestly, I've got nothing here. It honestly feels like we want to do black metal, we want to do metalcore, we want to do jazz. We want to scream over silence. And we want to have a little bit of a jazzy style, experimental, avant-garde metal guitar solo, but no jazz stuff is actually going to be used here. It's just going to be the essence of jazz's boundary pushing, or actually, I guess the essence of bebop and free jazz's boundary pushing that we want to utilize here. And that's what it really feels like to me is the band has all these different influences and they feel segmented. There's a little bit of crossover. Put the saxophone in the black metal section, and utilize that free jazz, experimentation in the metal solo. But it really is just this compartmentalized series of events. And like I said, I can't really pick up on the story overall, the journey, the emotional vibe. I didn't really grab anything like that. So I guess we're going to dive into the lyrics and see if maybe this can shed some light on what the song's supposed to mean or any themes that might be popping up in it that I overlooked. It says, "Silent hell within my mind. I'm deep in thought since I was born. Lethargic vigil fills my dreams. I hear echoes of those who mourn." Real quick before we get into this, because I think I forgot to bring it up, I understood words. I don't know if that's because the vocals are fairly close to a fry vocal, kind of close to the stuff you might hear in a modern metalcore song, which is my reference for harsh vocals. But there's also a bit of a blackened element to it. So again, I don't know if my ears are just getting better or if this was just really a vocal style really meant for my ears. But it was interesting that I could pick some of that out. So he's deep in thought ever since he was born, but this deep thought is also hell, as he states. Lethargic vigil fills my dreams. I hear echoes of those who mourn. Mirrors are covered with snow white sheets. Dismal whispers hide in the corner. What are you doing? Is this a game? Why do you treat me like a goner? Um, I think this is getting really dark. Uh, so mirrors are covered in snow white sheets reminds me of, an abandoned house, maybe where they left stuff, and and I don't know why this is a thing in horror films, especially ones that deal with ghosts. There's always white sheets over standing mirrors. I don't know. Is that a superstition? Maybe I'm just not privy to. Is there a superstition about leaving mirrors available in abandoned places, where like people won't be able to use them? So let's cover them up because of ghosts or something. How's that? Dismal whispers hide in the corners. What are you doing? Is this a game? Why do you treat me like a goner? So the narrator is speaking like they are alive, but people are not treating them as they're alive. Very ghost-like. In single file, they come to me, mumbling something, rub their eyes, voices too low, faces too grim. I just can't get what you're trying to tell me. I have stopped dead in the middle of motion. I am the rock at the center of mountain stream. My stillborn knowledge disinfects your sympathy. I mean, based on the title and kind of this conclusion of something ghost like, something dead and alive, dead and aware, I should say. It's a stillborn baby, but the baby still has consciousness for a few moments, and this is their, 45 seconds of life, which I don't think technically works within the idea of a stillborn. Um, but I mean, maybe we can't be in the mind of a newborn and know what they're thinking to know if a stillborn child is still conscious for a few moments before declared dead, so to speak. I mean, well, actually, not so literal, but uh, I don't know, man. That's a heavy song. I really hope that's not what it's about. Because, one, what a depressing topic to write about. I mean, I've said before, I'm all for using art to explore dark territory. I think that's uh, one of art's strengths is exploring things that are maybe less societally um, accessible, or maybe it's societally taboo. Art does a fantastic job of exploring that, especially even darker nature of humans and just dark topics like this. But I mean, it's also just very heavy. Not what I want to be talking about on the stream. I tend to talk about the positive things in the music. Talking about heavy topics is not something I enjoy. But also, if that is true, and I hate to make light of it, but what in the world does the music have to do with that? I mean, unless the music is the journey, I suppose that could be it. Being in the womb and then being born and then, you know, existing for 30 seconds in a world that makes no sense, that you don't understand what's going on, and then passing. I suppose that those are very distinct states of being, and having distinct states of music work with that, but Yeah, I don't know, man. That's where you guys come in. Those are my thoughts on Whiteward's Stillborn Knowledge. Let me know if I am accurate on that. I don't even know. I hope not. If you have any thoughts you'd like to add to this or correct anything I've said, go ahead and put those in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box, and there's a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. It has everything related to the channel. You can join the Patreon, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, just a bunch of stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We have a special selection today. If that interests you otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We'll be looking at another genre fusion and another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.